Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox back for another episode, and you are in for a treat today. Why? Because I am in for a treat today. We're visiting with author, podcaster, Texas A&M grad, small town Texas boy, Robert Riggs. Robert, first of all, welcome to the podcast.
A small town Texas boy always likes to get an audience.
So we met actually at Podfest Expo in January in Orlando, where he gave a very interesting talk on the use of AI in podcasting and writing. And I asked him if he'd come on the pod, and it turned out we had a whole lot more in common. And he's had a really interesting career. I'm going to tease. He's knows about the FCPA, so we're going to do that on a separate pod. But maybe you could tell us where you grew up, where you matriculated, and a little bit about your professional career.
I grew up in Paris, Texas, which is up in northeast Texas on the Red River, out about 90 miles from Dallas. Small town. Back in those days, an agricultural town. You had a town square. Around that square were independent merchants, most of which were World War II veterans who'd come back and were making a life, not necessarily from Paris, but they'd settled there and built the community and their families there. It was a great place to grow up because there was just so much wisdom among these men and women. They were all children of the Depression. There was a lot to learn. I wish I had followed more of my dad's advice and other advice. But, I remember I used to lay in a clover field in the pasture and watch jets going over that were headed over to the Air Force Base outside of Fort Worth and just dream of flying one of those, getting out of here. And so I learned to fly in high school, worked off lessons with a crop duster who'd been a B-24 pilot in World War II. And that was my dream. And it started as a young child. I kept poster boards in my room of airplane pictures. I built model airplanes hanging from my ceiling everywhere. That was the dream. And I got an appointment to the Air Force Academy, and you had to go to your nearest Air Force base for a flight physical. And I found out I needed glasses, didn't know it, and that was it. That didn't happen. And my mom, for God bless her, was always like, "You've always had a talent for drawing. You ought to go to A&M and study architecture." Now, my uncle, who had been at A&M during the war, was called up to go to the war. He always wanted me to go to A&M. He was encouraging me. I still had the dream of flying. And so I went to A&M because thinking I could fly. I found out that it was in Army helicopters in Vietnam. Somebody I'd known had been killed doing medevac, and I didn't see that in the cards. So I ended up majoring in architecture and construction at A&M, how to build things. And it was great. It was a great creative endeavor. You really learn the creative process, but moreover, you learned how to work with people. Everything was done in teams, and you had to take criticism because you would have architects or contractors come in and live review your work, and you had to stand up and defend it and take the hits. And that was the best training for life that I ever got. I kind of found my way at A&M. I really didn't do extracurricular stuff in high school because I was always working after school. I started working young. But there I ran for the Student Senate, got elected to the Student Senate. I was a chairman of a committee at the Memorial Student Center, which is the big focus of student activities there. They always say that in my day that at A&M you got that other education for how to work with people, get along with people, and carry it into your life. But during all that, I got hooked on politics, volunteered in campaigns. One of my dad's best friends was a very powerful member of the legislature, Senator A.M. Aiken. And I would literally cut class sometimes, go over during the session and just carry his bags around, get him coffee. But I just learned. And I remember him telling me, just sit quiet and listen. And so I got a position upon graduation with the late Congressman Wright Patman. I arrived on Capitol Hill in May of 1972, and Mr. Patman had been elected in 1929. He was the dean of the House, the senior member, and these are the days when all the committee chairmanships were made up of seniority. You'd outlived everyone, and most of those chairmanships in the House were dominated by Texans. And later, that system was abolished. People thought it was dictatorial. I'll say this in hindsight about the system. They got things done. And these men had such a knowledge of history. They knew what mistakes not to make. I during in a meeting in the congressman's office once with the staff huddled around him, I used to refer to it as the throne room, big member like that. It's kind of like the king. And I chimed in as the young one with an idea, and he was very polite and everything. When we were leaving, the chief of staff put his arm around me and said, "Hey, young man, there's nothing you're going to teach this old dog. He's done it all. He has seen it all. Just come in here and listen and learn." And boy, that was great advice. And eventually, that took me out on the campaign trail as an advance man in the first Carter presidential campaign. I came out of that, and my father had terminal cancer, died young, and then it was like I had to figure out what am I going to do. And there were offers to work in the Carter White House, but I was really, it was one of those moments. What am I going to do? And when I'd been at a congressional committee for Mr. Patman, I was the young staffer. It was the Defense Committee. Everybody else was from military intelligence and the CIA. I was the young kid, but I worked for the chairman, and there was a lot of press attention to our work. They didn't want to be seen. They knew it was hazardous to your career. So the young kid here was talking to the Washington Post, CBS, you name it. And so when I thought about things, I really did what they did. I always felt that there was a lot of stuff in Congress that I thought the public, the taxpayer had a right to know, and they never knew. And so I went that way, and I had met along the way Bob Schieffer. He was the CBS correspondent of the House, and he was from Fort Worth. So there was a natural affinity of Texans. We weren't friends, didn't know it, but the fact that I was a Texan, he helped me get started. And one of the finest people in journalism I ever met. What you used to see on the camera when he was a correspondent, he was a Face the Nation host,
Right.
temporarily the anchor. He Bob told it like it is, and it was just a great background, great experience of me getting in. And now, more than 30 years later, here I am. I did television for 30 years, and here we are.
Then you wrote some books and then you started podcasting. Tell us about that journey.
I started the podcast in during the midst of the pandemic. I had been writing. I'd been a writer for executives at Morgan Stanley, and I'd worked with some of the big time personal injury lawyers, the guys that doing the big million, not the ambulance chasers, these really big, complicated cases. And I lost all my business in 1 week. The courthouses shut down. They didn't know if they were going to have businesses. For a long time, people had encouraged me to do a podcast and do it on crime because some of the stories from my past, and including my wife, she was really the one that understood it. And I had put up a bunch of stories from my broadcast career in YouTube, and I told her, I said, I was embedded in Iraq, and I did the Gulf War, first Gulf War, and I did the war down in Nicaragua, and I thought, that's the stuff. I really enjoy doing all this, been on a defense committee. That's the stuff to do it about. We went and looked at the numbers. No. The stories about crime, they were off the charts, and that just told me, okay, so that's what I should do. And I should have started doing it a lot earlier. And I'd grown to the point where I was kind of tired of being creative for clients that at the end of the day, you wonder, do they really appreciate all of this and what you're putting into it? I wanted to go back to I'm in control of telling the story. So we started the podcast. I started with a story from my reporter's notebook from, gosh, back in 1991, 92, when I first came to Texas. I had left Washington, D.C. I was covering the White House and the Congress, Pentagon. I was burned out, tired. We were starting a family. Our family was here. We wanted to get back to family. So I ended up at the legislature in Austin, but it immediately uncovered a parole selling scheme. And so I went back to that story to really flesh it out more because now investigators, they were retired, they could talk, there were more records to get. And it's about a serial killer, probably the most notorious in the history of Texas. A lot of people have never heard of, named Kenneth Allen McDuff. Worse than Ted Bundy. That's not Robert saying it. That is some of the behavioral profilers at the FBI said that looked into the case. Started off as a podcast immediately, won a Webby Award for it, and then spun it into a 5-part television series for Fox Nation Media, and they won a lot of awards. And so we've been going ever since. There was a lot of interest, a lot of people coming to me that wanted more TV shows. It was a hit at Fox. But and we started work that we really put a lot of our focus in that. Sizzle Reel spent a lot of money. And then the two strikes hit Hollywood, and it hadn't been the same. Things really changed, budgets cut, what have you. And so I really had to pivot back to we've got to really get all in on the podcast. We got to figure out a way for the podcast to make money, grow the audience, and that's what we're doing today. And but I love telling stories. That's the bottom line.
So you gave a presentation, as I mentioned, at Podfest Expo on the use of AI in your creative process. Could you talk to us a little bit about that?
ChatGPT came out in November of 2022, and there was some buzz starting about it. And I actually called a friend of mine that was doing AI for the Pentagon based on my old defense contacts. And I said, "Hey, is this real or is this just some new craze or something?" And he went, "No, Robert, it's very real. Very real." He said, "You need to start today. What do you think I should do?" He said, "Look, just start experimenting and go see if it'll write titles for your stories," which is really tough. Can really take a God, I remember spending 3 hours at a time trying to come up with the right title, the keywords, everything else. I was astonished, astonished. And so really began learning, devouring everything I could learn about AI just to stay up. And I've really ChatGPT and another one called Claude that's part of Anthropic. Those are two powerful platforms. And I literally began teaching them to write and think like I do. And I began feeding my stories, my past stories, how I write. And I've developed long prompts describing how I write. And it really has been a teaching process on that part. And it's always because those platforms are always getting better. I'm always tweaking and changing, but it's really been in a process of experimentation, and it's just go try things. And so, for example, I'd heard that ChatGPT could analyze a photograph. This has been a while back. So I dropped in a photograph of my crew and I in Iraq. It was embedded. And I said, "Where's this photograph?" They could not tell me it was in Iraq, but it did tell me it was in a desert in a combat situation. It described the camouflage on the vehicles. It noted that we were under fire because people were in a prone position with their M16s. And I was like, oh boy. And I was doing research in newspapers.com, and it's copies of old microfiche. It's hard to read the stuff from the papers in the 30s and stuff about gangsters. And I was like, I need to get this out into like a Word doc where I can really read it and stuff. I tried every kind of optical software out there, nothing could do it. Just on a lark, I took a screenshot, JPEG of the article, dropped it into ChatGPT, and it extracted all the text into a document. I was amazed. Taking that further, I've been working on a side project, working on a story about flight group in World War One that joined the war. The young men joined the war before we ever entered, and they flew for the French, Lafayette Escadrille. And I'd found documents online they were written handwritten in French. It could extract that and translate it into English for me. And it's just been these constant experimentations like that, it's helped me become a better writer. The thing I want to emphasize is that you need high octane fuel to put in your hot rod, as we used to say in Paris back in the day. So you got to put in high octane fuel. If you're a good writer, you need to put your writing in there and see if it can't help you. And then it's a process of, I think journalists, maybe lawyers, anybody who's in the business of asking questions, I think we have an advantage because you have to talk to it. You got to ask questions back and forth. So I use it now. It'll analyze my analytics, which are overwhelming, spreadsheets and all that I can't do. I dropped in two time ranges of spreadsheets, and my podcast has got listeners all over the world. And I dropped in the ones for the United States, and I asked it to tell me what city has had the largest percentage of growth. And it identified Reno, Nevada, and then Las Vegas. And then it said, unprompted, Robert, you might want to put some more marketing resources there. Something's going on. I'd have never known this. I couldn't have figured this out with spreadsheets. For me, old guy and all too, it's that new thing that kind of keeps the little gray cells still popping and going.
How do you use AI in your podcast production process?
I have on a lot of true crime authors. I have the ones on that are journalists, and they're the best because factual and I know their reputations. So right now I'm working on one. Got a two-parter starting tomorrow called Mafia Spies by a terrific investigative reporter, my vintage, who has really done the deepest dive story ever into how in the late 50s, the CIA recruited the mafia to try to kill Castro. And a lot of it is in the JFK files that have been released in the past and the recently released files. But he's got a book about it. It's a long book. It's a tome, which I didn't have time to read, but I now have a prompt that will summarize every chapter and the high points for me and give me about 600 words per chapter. So I've now got a basis for my interview. So it starts there. And it just helps me lead the interview. I've now got it going. So I will then, I've got my interview, I'll write my podcast off of that. But along the way, paragraph by paragraph, I get AI to help me. I may have, I may have some sort of metaphor and I just can't get it out, but I'll tell it what I'm trying to achieve. And it really helps, but it's a back and forth thing of getting there, but I'm certainly more productive and more efficient doing it. And so I will come out with a transcript for the podcast that is an interview style. And one of the things I do, and this is again just another way to try to grow the podcast, I've been giving away a newspaper style story to weeklies that are desperate for content. They can't afford it, and I'll give them an 800 to 1,000 word story, newspaper style. And I've taught it how I write for newspapers. And I've fed it my past writing style, and I've asked it to improve on it. And I've gone into detail, and this is going on all the time, but I've got to the point now I can drop the transcript of my podcast story in a split second. I've got a great 800 word newspaper story. Now, I proof it, because AI will do a thing called hallucinating, where sometimes it makes up things. And I've even got specificity in there to restrict it from doing that, but I will still catch it sometimes doing it. And I will ask it, why did you have this in the story? And it literally has said to me, Robert, I wanted to give the story a little more oomph. Wow. You begin to think you're talking to a person. But you gotta, you can't just blindly trust it. So then I'll take that transcript of the podcast and I start then asking it for titles. But then I've got a prompt to describe what I'm looking for in titles. And it's got a list of 100 top ranked true crime keywords, and I want to utilize those. And so it then goes through the script and then begins pumping them out, and they're really good. And so I'll get 25 to choose from. Oftentimes I add a little something to them, and I'll even go back and say, "What do you think about what I did?" Then it does all my social media posts. I hate dealing with social media, and so it does an incredible job of social media for me. And I use a tool that I can schedule. It's a scheduling tool, makes it really easy because I'd rather be writing and I'd rather be talking to people like you or retired FBI agents or marshals about getting their stories than doing that. But all through the writing process, it does this for me. I'll tell you what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to see if I can get it to take the raw interview transcript and turn it into the podcast. And I've tried a number of things, but we haven't been able to get there with that. It's just not that capable. But I've seen it get better and better. The its ability to create images was very primitive back two or more years ago, and I can show you examples. And now ChatGPT has introduced a new image maker called Sora that it comes out as a photograph. So I ask it for something I've been working on for a photographic quality of Bonnie Parker of Bonnie and Clyde with her smoking a cigar, holding a Thompson submachine gun. There's a kind of a version of that picture out there, but
Right.
we've got all kinds of rights issues that I'm not going to use somebody that's got their photograph that's got rights, and I can't afford to pay for them. But I get a version, and then I can put a disclaimer that's an AI conception, but it's amazing. It's her. So I'll tell you, Tom, we're really rapidly reaching the point of how are you going to know if this is real or not? And I really believe though we're all going to have to get out in public and prove who we are. And there's a part of this that's been my benefit. The part that alarms me, I can think like criminals, and oh boy, it has started and it's coming. It is in the online scams and everything else. Oh, it is coming. And I don't think people or the country is ready for what's coming at them.
Does law enforcement know this is coming?
I don't think I don't think they know the scale of it because heck, they're still trying to figure out some of this. I'm in an FBI group called InfraGard. It was set up after 9/11, and it's a partnership between private sector and the FBI to help protect critical infrastructure. And I actually got solicited because I'd done a bunch of stories in the past that involved the FBI, and I had a good relationship. And but anybody in a corporation go join. Now they're going to do a background check on you, and there's certain security requirements of stuff not to disclose. But I've now submitted. They're setting up an AI group. Uh, but I'm telling you, that horse is out of the barn. And people like Meta, they're doing open source where anybody can then turn it to any devious thing they want to do with it. And it's already happening. And I'll give you an example. Online scams, or one of the big things is the text messages now. If you really look careful, sometimes at the web domain they want you to go to, you'll see something's misspelled or out of order
Right.
because these are big boiler room operations going on in China and Asia and the Ivory Coast of Africa, the Philippines, and they don't have a good command of English. ChatGPT does. They do. It will do it. I I use an app that I could actually I have cloned my voice, very high end quality, because there are some things that I want to do that are 45 minutes. And that's hard. And the time it takes, you're going to make mistakes and all. But I went to 11 Labs, is probably the best model out there for accuracy, and had it done, fed them over 3 hours of how I wanted my talk, my pacing, and everything. My wife can't tell the difference. I can tell the difference, but my wife can't. My friends can't. And if I have something that's just me, I'll use it in there. And I'm telling you, people cannot tell the difference. Now, in other podcast interviewing people that won't work there, I record all of those. And I can hear the difference. There was a sportscaster used this for the Olympics. Oh gosh, I'm going blank, famous football. He does the anyway, he was skeptical of doing it, but they had this thing they wanted to do him a wrap up after the end of the day of the Olympics that would kind of be uniquely sent out to thousands of followers. And it did it. And he was amazed. He just was amazed, skeptical at first, but amazed. Now then, you take somebody who's got an open-ended AI, like what Meta's doing, and now I go into TikTok and I capture your daughter or in Instagram talking all the time, and now I've got her voice. And now you can get a phone call from your daughter saying that she's been held for ransom, and if you don't send this money in 10 minutes, she's dead, and you could hear her screaming, and it's not her. And that's going on. That really is starting to really go on, and they'll use AI to go out and look at Facebook profiles, Instagram, trying to find out where people are and try to take advantage of you if they know your daughter is somewhere you can't reach her or she's overseas or what have you. That's the kind of stuff it's coming.
So what's on for Robert Riggs down the road?
We're working on an interesting thing that I've done some cold cases, and I've met some of the top investigators in cold cases. And the sad thing is, this is a silent scandal in America. There are 300,000 cold cases. And if they don't get solved quickly, they end up in a file. Like in Fort Worth, there are 1,000 cold cases over there. Now, recently, we've seen some big breakthroughs of using DNA and all, but it is intensive for people. Police departments' budgets have been cut in the wake of defund the police. They don't have the resources. And so I've got a pilot episode I'm working on with a cold case detective named Joe Kennedy. Joe was a special agent at NCIS. He started the first federal cold case unit in the country. He's retired now, but he and a group of agents have got a group that operates out of North Carolina that you can call if you're a small department or something and say, hey, God, we got this tough case. We don't have the resources to investigate it. Could you come help us? And so Joe and I reached out to me and said, hey, what if we could do cases that had bounties, rewards, like Crime Stoppers, and see if we couldn't help? And so we've got a case that we've shot it, done it. We're trying to put it together. It's a case out of small town, 60 miles south of Nashville, the murder of a business executive. And it's a tough case. And the reward is $1 million. And so what we're hoping of getting something out like that out in a podcast and on our podcast in YouTube, maybe it will convince somebody to loosen up their lips as money does. Because all my career, there's no honor among thieves. Somebody will talk if there's an incentive like this. They're not going to do it for the good of somebody, but if there's something for them, I'm just something we're working on. I've explored trying to figure out, could we use AI to help solve cold cases, because the problem is the file, analyzing the file. But my understanding is there's some other groups working on that, and with the government, but with the budget cutbacks, I don't know what's going to happen to that. But I've still got that kind of on the back burner. Have had some meetings at Texas A&M with their people to figure out, could we do that? So that's sort of at the moment, you know, the hottest thing. I have a lot of listeners that like my voice, and they're always asking me, could you record something to help me relax and go to sleep at night? So we're thinking about that. I've got a bunch of interesting stuff that's the copyright is expired on. It's pre-1929, and that we're thinking about doing as well. But yeah, if we don't go into a recession with all these threatened tariffs, I'll be great.
Robert, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode. But before we leave, I wanted to ask you if our listeners wanted more information about you, more information about any of your pods, what would be the best place or places for them to go?
If they just search Google or what search engine they use, True Crime Reporter, I'll come up at the top of the page. You can you can go to listen to the podcast, subscribe to the podcast. You can buy our book, Texas Crime Stories. It's a 15-chapter anthology of pretty sensational crimes in Texas, all types of things that I've covered. You can get the audiobook there. One of the things we've started is a newsletter called Stories to Keep You Safe. And so I'm now talking to the experts I have on that are from the FBI, the marshals, and everything about tips of how to stay safe using your mind, not a firearm, because part of this is how can you keep yourself out of trouble? And so we're doing that in there. And part of I want to help educate people. And so they can find all of that there. We've got a YouTube channel too, True Crime Reporter. Everything's True Crime Reporter. If you want to reach me directly about a case or something that's happened to you or a story you want to tell, it Robert at truecrimereporter.com. That'll do it. And I urge you to go subscribe, start listening, and it will keep you up there. Also, I've got an arrangement with a lot of really nice high-end products that my wife and I use. And so it's a way to try to support our work. There's discount product codes in there that you'll get a huge discount. We get a commission. We disclose all of that. And so we've got, for instance, Eric Javits hats that Melania wore one at the inauguration, but our interest is that Brenda Lee and the star of the closer, she wears one. My wife wears it. And so ones we have a relationship with, there's one in there called Cozy Earth for bedding and loungewear that's been Oprah's favorite since 2018. I've got a connection to Oprah. We got our Peabody Awards together at a luncheon years ago and got to know her, and then you'll see us together in there. So it's all stuff we're using it, got a somehow a relationship that we know is good. So that's all there, True Crime Reporter. And love to hear your stories, love to hear your feedback. For the new subscribers to our newsletter, I even have a thing there. You can schedule a Zoom call with me just for us to get to know each other. I want to kind of hear what your interests are, what kind of stories you want us to cover, how'd you find us, that sort of thing.
Robin, unfortunately, we are near the end of our time for this episode, but I wanted to thank you again. This has been an absolutely delightful podcast, and I hope we can continue this conversation.
I'd love to. And as Tom, you've seen, I love to talk.